Welcome to this first lecture on theory of authoritarianism. Authoritarianism is a personality-based theory of racism. It argues that the racism is caused by personality dynamics that come from childhood, deep-seated in your personality. This guy's name is Baron Stradom. In 1988, when he was 23 years old, he took a gun, went into Pretoria Stradom Square and started shooting people. He shot 22 people, 7 of whom died. It wasn't just a random shooting. He shot black people only. It was a racial attack. Eyewitnesses at the time said he was walking around with a big smile on his face. He was happy why he was doing this. And when asked in court later why he had shot a cancer patient sitting on a hospital bus, he replied, and I quote, "There were no other blacks in the area." And newspaper articles at the time said, "Is this guy crazy? Is he mad?" Now, the theory of authoritarianism suggests that he may well be. There is a certain madness associated with this kind of racism, this kind of prejudice. The context of the time is that in the 1940s, it was widely believed that prejudice was caused by ignorance. You might have had the negative experiences of a hypothesis. You say you had a negative experience with a member of another group. Say, for example, you met a Zimbabwean and they treated you badly, etc. Now, you've never been to Zimbabwe, but you think, all Zimbabweans are like that. So it starts off with negative experience with one or two members of a group that's then generalized to the group as a whole. So underlying this is basically ignorance. You don't know what the other people are like. And this idea that racism and prejudice is underpinned by ignorance is widespread even today. For example, Kofi Annan, the previous head of the United Nations, argued that what the United Nations should be trying to do is get rid of ignorance, get rid of prejudice, and that's a way in which they would be able to eradicate racism. But is this true? Is this the case? There's two bits of evidence that suggest that this might not be the case. Firstly, people like Baron Stradom, in extreme cases of racial hate, does it seem plausible that it's an overgeneralization or it's just ignorance that underlies such levels of hate? No. And the second bit of evidence is evidence that there are individual differences in racism, so that people that are racist or prejudiced towards one group, Zimbabweans for example, are also prejudiced towards a whole lot of other groups, Mozambicans, people from the Congo, etc., even if they haven't had any negative experiences with those people. This is evidence I'm going to show you now from our own students a couple of years ago. This is a social distance questionnaire. Now, the social distance questionnaire allows us to measure your attitudes towards members of different groups. In this example over here, according to my first feeling reaction, I'd willingly admit any, most, few, or no people of black people to work in my country, to my school or university, as personal friends or close kinship by marriage. You can see why it's called a social distance questionnaire. How close or how far would you like to have people of that group? And the data show, if you see these correlation coefficients, those R's, there's a correlation coefficient, they're all about 0.6, 0.409, 0.75. Correlation coefficient 0, there's no correlation, and 1 is a perfect correlation. So all these show very high correlations between your social distance towards one group and your social distance towards others. So this tends to suggest that some people dislike a whole lot of groups, and other people tend to not dislike them or not be prejudiced. So in other words, there's individual differences in prejudice. Now the question is, why? Why are some people more prejudiced or racist than others? There's a sense that there's an underlying personality cause. There's a psychological condition that makes some people more racist or prejudiced than others. And in the 1950s, this theory of prejudice became very widespread, very popular. Gordon Allport wrote the famous book, The Nature of Prejudice, suggests that ultimately prejudice has got to do with personality formation. It's got to do with your childhood, your upbringing, the kind of person that you are. The major work on authoritarianism was published in the 1950s. in the book called The Authoritarian Personality by Adorno et al. And it was in the context of fascism, the Second World War. So it was funded by the American Jewish Society. And basically what these authors did, they chose 1,500 school children, and then they measured their levels of racism. And they identified the most racist of these 1,500 and the least racist of these 1,500. And then subjected them to clinical interviews. It's like psychotherapy. They took the small sample of these really racist people and the small sample of these not racist people, and they did these clinical interviews with them. They did psychotherapy with them. They tried to find out what is their personality like, what's the differences, what distinguishes the really racist at a psychological level from the really not racist. And this is the theory that they developed. They said that they discovered 9 traits that distinguish the racist from the non-racist. The first is conventionalism. The racists were very conventional. Children should be seen and not heard. They had conventional values, old-fashioned values. They were very submissive to authority. The authorities, we must obey them, we must listen. Whereas the least prejudiced were likely to rebel against them. They were aggressive. They liked violence. They were preoccupied with power. Anti-interception, point number 5. They didn't like dealing with the tender sides, their emotions, their own deep feelings and things like that. Cynicism. They had a cynical attitude toward the world. You live once and you die, and that's all there is to it. Superstitious, associated with extreme cases of racism, beliefs, conspiracy theories, beliefs about other groups, religious kinds of beliefs, all kinds of superstitious beliefs, very puritanical views about sex. There should be no sex, don't talk about it, keep these things out of public life. Projection is a psychodynamic concept that basically argues that if you've got hatred toward the other people, you project that onto the others. You say, they hate me. So these authoritarians feel persecuted by others. They're aggressive towards others, but they keep on thinking others are aggressive towards them. But the important part of this syndrome, or the important part of these 9 traits, is that they hung together as a syndrome. The traits were correlated. People that had 1 or 2 traits tended to have the whole set of traits. So this over here is the syndrome of authoritarianism. Later research has suggested that the first 3, conventionalism, submission to authority, and aggression, are the most important. And it is true that you can find these traits among fascists, among really racist people, among right-wingers. The classic case in our own history, South Africa, is Eugene de Blanche. You can take a look at that YouTube clip over there, and you can see some of the ideas that he spouted. But if you go and look at Wikipedia about Bar and Stradum or about Eugene de Blanche or other right-wingers, you can find typical characteristics of these authoritarians. So in the next lecture, we will look at the cause. Where does authoritarianism come from? Thank you.